The rain was falling hard that morning, tapping against the tall glass walls of the Ashbourne mansion like a restless drum. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, golden chandeliers, and the echo of a silence money couldn't buy. Billionaire Richard Ashbourne sat in his office, staring at the framed photo of his twins, Ethan and Ella, who had been born with a rare condition that left them unable to walk. For years, he had poured millions into doctors, therapies, and clinics around the world. But nothing had changed. His heart, once proud and powerful, was now heavy with helplessness. He had everything money could buy, yet he couldn't buy his children's smiles or their freedom. The world saw him as a man who could fix anything, but behind closed doors, he was broken. One morning, the housekeeper informed him that a new maid had arrived. Someone the agency sent last minute after the old one resigned. Her name was Grace. She was quiet, polite, and carried a calm energy that contrasted sharply with the mansion's cold perfection. She didn't say much, but she smiled often, a warm, gentle smile that made even the harshest corners of the house feel softer. Richard barely noticed her at first. To him, staff came and went like seasons. But the twins did notice. Grace treated them differently from anyone else. She didn't look at them with pity or sadness. She spoke to them as if they were whole. Every morning, she would open their curtains wide and let the sunlight pour in. "Good morning, sunshine," she would say cheerfully. Even when the twins refused to respond, she'd bring them small gifts: a colorful paper butterfly, a music box that played soft lullabies, or a flower she picked on her way in. Slowly, the twins began to smile again. For the first time in months, Richard heard laughter echoing down the hall. It startled him. He peeked in one morning to see Grace sitting on the floor, holding Ethan's limp legs and telling him stories about strength. Not the kind you show in muscles, but the kind you find in your heart. At first, Richard thought she was just a kind-hearted woman doing her job. But soon he began to notice something strange. Every time she was near, the twins seemed different. Their eyes brighter, their hands twitching slightly. He dismissed it as coincidence, until one day he walked into the nursery and froze. Grace was on her knees, her hands pressed gently over Ella's legs. Whispering softly, her eyes closed in deep concentration. A soft hum filled the room, not from her lips, but from the air itself. The light seemed to bend toward her, wrapping her and the child in a golden warmth. Richard's breath caught in his throat. When Grace opened her eyes, she saw him watching. She quickly removed her hands and stood, her face calm but her eyes worried. "Sir, I can explain," she began. But Richard raised his hand, his voice low and shaking. "What were you doing to my daughter?" Grace hesitated. "I was praying, sir. Not just with words, but with faith." Richard frowned. "You think prayer will fix what science cannot?" He scoffed. But that night, something impossible happened. Ella's toes moved. Not much, but enough for the nurse to gasp. Richard stayed up the entire night watching the surveillance footage. He saw the moment Grace touched his daughter's legs. The hum, the light, and the first flicker of life. The next day, he confronted her again. "Who are you really?" he demanded. Grace lowered her gaze. "Just someone who believes, sir. I lost my little boy years ago. He couldn't walk either. I prayed for him every night, but he passed before I could see a miracle. When I saw your twins, I felt God was giving me another chance to pour that love into someone else." Her words pierced through Richard's defenses like lightning. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in him: hope. Days turned into weeks, and under Grace's care, the twins began to change. Their legs twitched more often. They could move their fingers. They laughed. They sang. Doctors couldn't explain it. "It's as if their nerves are waking up," one said in disbelief. Richard watched in silent awe, realizing that the woman he'd hired to clean his floors was somehow healing what the world's best hospitals could not. One afternoon, he found Grace sitting with Ethan under the oak tree in the garden. She was holding his hands, whispering gently as he tried to push himself up. For the first time, his legs held weight. Richard felt tears sting his eyes. He hadn't cried since his wife died during childbirth, leaving him alone to raise the twins. For years, he'd blamed himself, buried himself in work, and shut out the world. But now, watching Grace and his son under the sunlight, he realized that all his riches, all his business empires, none of it meant anything compared to this simple miracle unfolding before him. Weeks later, the day came when Ethan and Ella stood for the first time. Their legs trembled, but they stood. The entire staff gathered, cheering and crying. Richard knelt beside them, holding their hands as they took their first steps toward him. "Daddy, look!" Ella cried. Richard pulled them into his arms, sobbing openly. Grace stood behind them, smiling through tears. He turned to her and whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me, sir. Thank the one who gave them strength." That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Richard called the entire household together. He raised his voice, filled with emotion. "All my life, I believed money could solve anything. But today, a woman of faith showed me what real power looks like. Grace didn't just heal my children, she healed my heart." The twins ran to Grace, wrapping their arms around her, laughing joyfully. Months passed, and Richard built a foundation in Grace's name. The Grace Foundation. For children with disabilities. Dedicated to helping those without hope. Grace continued working there, not as a maid, but as a counselor, spreading the same faith and warmth she had given his children. Richard's mansion was no longer silent. It was filled with music, laughter, and love. And as his children ran across the garden, their legs strong and free, Richard often looked up at the sky and whispered, "Miracles don't come from money. They come from the heart that believes." If you believe miracles still happen, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. Because sometimes, faith can change everything. Even what the world says is impossible months after the miracle. Life at the Ashbourne mansion had completely changed. The twins, once confined to wheelchairs, now ran through the halls, their laughter echoing like sunlight. Richard watched them every morning, still in awe of what had happened. Yet deep inside, he couldn't stop wondering, how did Grace do it? One evening, he found her in the garden, kneeling beside the roses. "Grace," he said softly, "you changed our lives. But I need to know. Was it truly faith?" She looked up with that same calm smile. "Faith, love, and something greater than both, compassion," she said. "When you give your heart, miracles answer." Richard felt his chest tighten. He had built skyscrapers, empires, and fortunes. But this woman had built something far greater, peace. He decided that night to honor her work forever. Within weeks, the Grace Foundation opened its first center for children with disabilities, offering care, therapy, and hope, free of cost. Reporters called it the Billionaire'S redemption. But Richard called it something else. His second chance. Grace never sought fame or wealth. She only smiled, watching the children play. And as Ethan and Ella ran to hug her, Richard finally understood. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in the hearts you heal. If you believe kindness is the greatest miracle, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that touch the soul.